In this tutorial, we're going to see how to create seamless patterns. I work with many different softwares, and I think that Corel Painter is the best software to do so. It's much more intuitive, and the tools that they give you are perfect to be working like this. And I would say that afterwards, the results you get here, you can use in any other kind of software. You can use it in ProCreate, you can use it in Photoshop, maybe you can as well use it in 3D rendering softwares. So I'm just going to show you how to create it and what you have to be aware of if you are working with it. So the first thing that is important is to search for images which are very homogenic about light. So if you're using your mobile phone camera, you have to be aware that you may have some areas from the pattern which are lighter or darker, which is going to make the whole thing much more difficult. But if you have already some kind of paper textures from real paper and you scan them, the chance for you to have like a much better and homogenic result is larger. So I would really recommend you guys to start scanning some interesting papers that you have maybe home. I'm going to show you a little list from things I just scanned for you to have an idea. So I just got a few papers and I started scanning them, and some things which are interesting to analyze is that here's, for example, something that I worked as well on already to make a paper texture out of it, is to start searching for papers which has a good quality for your work. And I just like to be working with analogous paper and bring this kind of analogous look into my illustration. So I started scanning with a white background from my scanner, and afterwards I just got like a piece of black paper and put it underneath it so that maybe I could get some different contrasts to try a little bit out and see what I can do with them. So I just scanned like canvases, some with patterns, some watercolor paper, some handmade paper, just to get an idea how could I be working with it. And I'm just going to close this, and I just decided to be working with this kind of gray, very patterned paper. And things to be analyzing before you start working with it is that it's interesting to have pieces of paper which does not have like a very strong mark. Like for example, this handmade paper has a very strong line already in the pattern. So if you could kind of grab part of this paper which does not have this very strong line in it, because it's going to be always exist like a repetition. Here you can see as well there is a very strong kind of diagonal line in this pattern. I just am going to select a piece of it which is without these very strong lines already on the paper. So I'm starting my selection, and then I'm going to press Shift in the middle of it, and I'm ending up my selection. I'm doing like a perfect square, and you can see that here I don't have this very strong line in it, and I just have a little piece of this kind of diagonal in here. I'm copying this part of this image by pressing Command C. I'm opening a new file with Command N, and usually I work with a like 10 by 10 centimeters file, but everything depends as well from your scanned image. So I scan it quite high, in a very high resolution, and we need something around 300 pixels per inch so that the pattern is not going to be full of pixels. And afterwards I'm reducing the size of this image because I don't need all this white parts around it. With a crop tool, double click on it, and I have my first part done. When we talk about paper, we're talking about kind of a layer mask. So all the image needs to be in black and white. We have some kind of color in here. If you have a even more colorful paper, I would recommend you guys then to be desaturating this whole image, you can see already that I have some information already changed in here, so it would be kind of totally minus 139% from the saturation. I would just really take all the color out, and I could here kind of increase or decrease the value a little bit. I could as well be working the contrast, because every good paper has a good amount of contrast, and I would not maybe do that strong. It's actually very good to have some white and some black into it. And then afterwards I'm going to start doing what is the most important part from the whole tutorial. It is to be working with the patterns. So I'm going to Window, can find first my patterns by pressing Command A, and afterwards I'm going to open on the same place Papers by pressing Command 9. And having these two palettes open, I'm going to the hamburger menu from Patterns, and I'm selecting Define Pattern. This is really important. At the moment I do so, I can now grab my stamp tool, and I'm going to show you a little trick. If I go to a normal brush and I go to the function tool, which gives me like the anatomy from the brushes, I can go then to pattern, and from here I can change the quality from my dab. So instead of having like a 1 pixel dab, I'm going to select the linear profile, and I'm increasing the size of my brush. I'm holding the Option key to select one area, and I'm going to stamp the corners. And you can see that everything that I'm doing on the right side, it's appearing on the left side. So I'm just doing the whole frame again, so that I have a seamless corners, like the whole area here, up and down and on the right, on the bottom, is going to be seamless on the side from the square. So afterwards I'm going to be looking, like I'm going to tie up my eyes a little bit, and I'm going to be looking for areas which maybe be strange for a pattern. Like I have a very strong line crossing up here. I'm going to break this line a little bit. So I'm just selecting another area up here, and I'm just breaking this a little bit, maybe bringing up some lightness and darknesses. If you have like a very strong dark area or a very strong light area in the pattern, you have to break it as well. But in this case, I got a very kind of homogenic pattern. It's very helpful. And after doing this, I have now 3 different layers, and I'm going to the burger menu from layers, and I'm saying alle ablegen. So I'm just flatten the whole layers into the first layer. I'm selecting everything by pressing Command A, and then I'm going to save pattern. It's this tiny little white square underneath here, and I'm giving a name to it. And afterwards I'm saving this. So you're going to see that it's going to appear in your list. If it does not appear straight afterwards, you can maybe try to open and close a little bit more your window. Sometimes it just gets lost in here. And afterwards I'm going to open a new file to try this out, and I'm selecting my pattern, and I'm grabbing a tool that gives me this nice paper structure. I'm increasing my brush, and then I'm trying it out. And here you have a seamless pattern. So now that the paper texture is done, I recommend you guys to save it. And you can save this as a JPEG or as a PSD file. And the best would be to save it in the best quality, so 100%. And afterwards you can export it, and I'm going to show you how to do it. And you can see here a little bit export link. I'm exporting this through AirDrop into my iPad, and I'm accepting this into my iPad, and I'm going to show you how to be working exactly the same pattern in ProCreate. Now we jumped into ProCreate, and I would like to show you guys how to be working the same texture in ProCreate. So I have my image open, and I would like to collect the image from my picture library. So this is the image I have. And you can see now that at the moment it gets into my picture is larger than the image that I added into here, and I have a few different ways to be dealing with it. The first one would be to just increase the size of this image, but depending on the size of my texture, I would start seeing pixels, so I would recommend not to do so. The second option would be just to duplicate this layer, and you can see that I can just go to the side on my layer and I duplicated it. I grab my layer tool and I can put this on the side of it. And just as an example for you to understand it, at the moment I do really just put it on the side. It works better than if I would just grab this and mirror, because sometimes if you do mirror this image, it's not going to be looking so good together. You may have some lines that repeats itself with an angle like we can see here, for example, or here again. Okay, so I would avoid mirroring the image. So one other very important thing to do is to bring this image as large as you can. Get the layer tool again and place this as close as possible and as aligned as possible. You can see here now I cannot see any lines between them. And I would just pinch these two images and bring everything into one single layer. Sometimes the pinching is not so easy. And then afterwards I'm going to duplicate this again, and I'm moving this down one more time, increasing the size of this image and bring this layer really very close to each other, as close as possible. That's not perfect yet. Yep. And now the difference between texture and the image is not so big, so I can just pinch this again and now really make it a bit larger. So after doing this, I'm going to go to my layers, and I need actually this layer with a texture twice, and I need them very well positioned, so they need to be really exactly on the same place. So now I would just duplicate it, and I would go to the one underneath it, and I would add an extra layer, and in this extra layer I'm going to be putting my image itself. I'm not going to be working straight on top of the layers with a texture on it. So I would just start, for example, painting in this one layer. Go for some different color here. I'm grabbing now one color. I'm selecting one brush that for now I'm going to use something quite flat, like for example tinted syrup, and I have to go to the layer on top and I have to change the mode of it. So on the top layer I'm going to say smooth light, and on the lower layer I'm going to multiply it. Now I'm going to the layer in the middle of it again. So now I can start painting in here. I'm going to do something quite quick. And you can see that I can see now my texture not only on the background but as well where I'm painting. If I would just leave one of those informations away, like if I take the paper texture from the top, I would not have the paper texture on the image, and if I would take this out, I would not have the paper texture on the background. So that's why it's important to have these two moments in here, and we can see that the paper texture is extremely strong on both of them. And I would like to reduce a bit of this paper texture, for example on the background, because less is very often more, and I could do the same on the one on the top so that it's not like so present. And then afterwards, having this image in here, it's still looking very unnatural for the paper texture that I selected. So I can pick up another type of brush, like for example this floating water or something like it. In German it's here under water, the first one, and I could now just play around a little bit with this tool and make the whole thing a little bit more kind of fitting together with the technique for this paper. I think that this is already a good way to be starting with it. Another idea that is important for you to be using in this case is for you not to do any mistakes and grab the wrong layer to be working with. I would actually block this two layers so that every single layer that you add in here comes between these two layers and this is not destroyed. You have another option as well if you want to be using this quite often and you would like to have this kind of a default. I would put all these layers in this way together. You have the background layer, you have the first and the second layer with the paper texture and the one for you to be painting on afterwards, and I would just go to the gallery and I would select this one image and I would duplicate it and I would give a new name to it. So that now every single time I would like to start a new image, I could use this new paper texture. So I'm going back to it. And the reason why as well I put this as a multiply layer in this layer mode, I'll just unblock it. The reason why I put it as a multiply is, for example, if I would like to go to the background and I would like to have like a very kind of slight colored paper instead of having this bright paper. And like this, I have this color on the background, and since I have this on multiply, this is going to grab the color from the background. Okay, so in this way I have not only a watercolor, but I have a watercolor with a slight amount of color so that it's not bright white. Going back to Corel Painter, we just did our pattern and we have usually as default 100, 100 and 50 on scale, contrast and value. And I'm trying this in here one more time first to remember where we stopped, and we can see that we can change the scale from this paper, and I like to do so to kind of control if the pattern works fine or not. And actually I'm quite happy with this one. This is a very strong type of paper texture, so it's not something that is very subtle, and one way to kind of reduce this contrast a little bit, and I reduced a little bit the value, and now I have a paper that can be painted until I don't see any of the pattern. It makes kind of an interesting kind of hole effect in here, and I have the possibility of changing as well the angle of the paper. So if I'm working with a few different colors, sometimes it's interesting to be changing the angle of the paper and like this, making the paper texture a little bit more dense. And if you still have some areas of the paper which are not working 100%. Maybe through turning the paper around a little bit, you can break again a little bit these areas which are very present, for example. Well, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Have fun doing your own paper textures, and I'll talk to you on the next tutorial. Bye bye.